This is Conversations at the Well, a monthly podcast that invites you to listen to ideas and stories that will refresh and challenge. It doesn't matter what state you are in. When you come to the well, you will always leave inspired and renewed. Let's listen to today's conversation, hosted by Bishop Roy.
Good day, everyone. It's always a delight to have you joining us on Conversations at the Well. In fact, it's the first one for 2022. And I'm so blessed this year to have as my first guest a nation builder, a wonderful Christian woman who continues to make her mark in Jamaica and elsewhere. Welcome to you, Dr. Christine Hendricks. How are you?
I am doing well. Thank you for having me, Dr. Roy Notice. My
It is my
bishop.
well, thank you, and it is my pleasure to have you on. You know, I could have no better guest to start this year than to have you, and I appreciate you consenting to be on. No, Christine, it is said that the strength of a nation and the health of a nation, if you want to judge it, you look at how we treat our elderly and our disabled citizens. You are well positioned to tell us whether or not this nation is healthy because you presently serve as the executive director for the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities. Did I get that right?
Yes, you did. Yes, you did.
Okay, wonderful. Let me ask you though, in terms of giving yourself fully to serving in helping those with disabilities, when did that actually start?
So after I did about 6 years at Mile Gully um secondary school as a teacher, I felt the tug that it was now time to study something else.
Okay.
I went to the New Testament summer camp 1 year, and Reverend Vernon introduced me to the Jamaica Theological Seminary, where I could do counseling because I wanted to do counseling psychology.
Right.
And they didn't have counseling psychology. So he told me that I could do guidance and counseling. And then I could go on to do my master's in counseling psychology if I wanted to at a later time. And so it was that at that youth camp, I'll never forget that youth camp. As a matter of fact, I was at this session and somebody, a young lady, they were dividing persons into teams. You wanted to go into the different groups. And this young lady, I never met her before. She just said to me, they said, persons who are interested in counseling should come, to this group, and persons interested in music go to another group. And she nudged me and she said, "You look like a counselor." And I looked at her and I was like, "Oh, you know that I'm interested in counseling." I said that in my mind. So I went into the group with Reverend Vernon, and that's where he introduced me to the theological seminary. So I went there, and it was my last day at the seminary doing my last course in group counseling. And the facilitator of group counseling asked us that day, "What's your greatest fear?" And in the group, I shared that at the time, my greatest fear was the fact that my husband and I had decided to leave Manchester. Well, he was going to go to UA for his final year, final 2 years, because he had done the years before in the evening, working and studying, and he was now coming in to do full time. And so we decided to leave Manchester, coming into Kingston. And when we came, I, I had resigned my job as a teacher.
Okay.
And coming into Kingston now, my greatest fear was the fact that we had moved, and I had no idea where I was going to get a job. I did not have a clue. Anyway, we got a break after I shared that, and other people shared their fears, and I stood up outside having my fruit at the break, and a gentleman walked up to me, and he introduced himself as the executive director of the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities. I'd never heard of that place before. And he said to me, I was listening to you inside, and I have been noticing you over our time in class. I didn't even know I had classes with him. He said, I know that you're a bright young lady and you have a great future ahead of you. Um, I noticed that you said, I heard you say your greatest fear not having a job. Um, I'd like to introduce you to the council and ask you if you know, first of all, that you have a disability. And I looked at him and I said, I have a what? You said you have a disability. And I said, what is that? He said, your fingers. And I'm like, oh, okay. All right, that's what it's called. I didn't know the word before, to be honest. Um, and he said to me, did you know that if you are um, registered with the Council for Persons with Disabilities, you are employed, you can apply for income tax exemption? And I was like, no, I didn't know that. He said, yes. And he asked me if I was interested. And I said, okay, fine, great. And then he said, I have a job to offer you. He, at the time, the principal rehabilitation officer was going on leave because she had become ill. She was going to be going on early retirement, and so they needed a replacement. And he said he was inviting me to apply. I was like, God, this is you? Really? Oh my goodness. Anyway, it didn't happen for a year. But during the year, can I tell you, that's another miracle by itself. The Monday before school was supposed to open, the Sunday, sorry, and it was the Monday school was going to open in September. I went to church the morning, and a gentleman was invited to preach. That I started going to the Portmore New Testament Church of God. Reverend W.A., Bishop W.A. Was the pastor of the church, and he had invited a guest preacher, and the gentleman preached the story about Job. And as the man preached, it sounded so much like my story, because we had come into Portmore, left Manchester, where we were paying like $3,000 for rent, and coming to Portmore where we were now paying $15,000. And I know I wasn't working, and my salary, I this was my last salary, and things were hard, things were tough, things were difficult. At one point, we didn't even have a fridge. Oh my goodness, I need to tell you that story. Oh my God, when we use God money and buy one motor for one fridge, and the fridge popped down anyway, to this day, we didn't get the use of that fridge. And I learned, don't touch God tithes and offering. It's not going to work out for you. So that's another story by itself. But anyway,
That's interesting, right? So did you eventually how did you eventually, after that invitation by the president, you eventually got in?
yeah, so a year after, I went to teach at Dunrobin High School for that year in between, miraculously. And then I went to apply to do the interview for the job of principal rehabilitation officer. And I started working at the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities in August 3, 1999.
Wow.
I started working there as the supervisor for all the social workers, and some workshops that they had, and a girls' hostel that they had in Kingston at the time.
Well, let's use that then to segue into just talking about the association itself, or the council, because
Yes.
I cannot help but say that God in his divine providence, opened the door for you and you stepped right in. And he opened it, you just said at the right time. Now it is said that in Jamaica, a lot of people don't really understand this whole disability. In fact, you said interesting, you said that you yourself, was you were unfamiliar with the word disability. So let's begin there. How would you define a disability?
So the Disabilities Act defines a disability as an individual who has a long-term impairment, and
Mm,
that long-term impairment can be physical, intellectual, mental, or sensory, and the sensory has to do with deafness or blindness. So any one of those, whether you've lost any of your limbs have been impacted, that's physical, including cerebral palsy. Although cerebral palsy, as the name says, it's something that's happening in the brain. It
right.
impacts persons physically. So cerebral palsy is not a brain, it's not a disability of the brain or the intellect. It's a physical disability, although it impacts the brain. And so the other disabilities are related to the limbs in terms of the physical. In terms of intellectual, it has to do with one's IQ being 50% or less than the average individual. And so persons with intellectual disabilities never usually get beyond a grade 6 in terms of their intellect and their learning, but they're very streetwise, some of them. And we have quite a number of persons with intellectual disabilities on the mild spectrum that they don't even acknowledge or recognize that they have an intellectual disability.
When we talk with sorry, Dr. Hendricks, it is said that sometimes in Jamaica we don't know what kind of a language to use when you're trying to name or describe a person with disability. So it says a person who is deaf. Do we say to the person, we know you're deaf, or do we say you have a hearing impairment? Or how would you guide us?
They're deaf. So they're either deaf or hard of hearing.
Okay.
Right. So they don't have a problem with being called deaf, because deafness is not only the fact that they don't hear, they have a whole culture and a whole history and a whole um sense of pride. Some persons, those who are learned, because they go to they get into being um uh part of tertiary level education. Some of them, they have studied abroad. And so for those who have reached a certain level, they have a pride about deafness, that if you tell them that they need hearing aid, they'll tell you, but I don't have a disability. They'll tell you that too, you know. And so deafness is not just not hearing, as I said, but it is a culture that they have come to accept. They have a whole language around it, the Jamaican Sign Language, and they have their whole lives wrapped around that culture that allows them to um, operate in society. And that's the reason they advocate so strongly for Jamaican Sign Language to be part of the culture of Jamaica, because they are a people who are part of the society. And so they need to be recognized as full citizens. And we need to speak their language so that they too can understand what's happening around them. And
Interesting.
so
And as you talk, Dr. Hendricks, about deafness, there's and about advocacy. One of the big advocacy move that in my preparation for the conversation with you was that the Disabilities Act was passed, and it was passed in 2014. That seems like a long time ago, almost a decade.
yes,
It is said that the act won't come into effect until next year, February.
yes.
That's a big gap. What happened?
So many things have happened. So although the Disabilities Act was passed in the Parliament in 2014,
Right.
there were a number of things that must be in place for it to be effective. Of course, there are the regulations. the establishment of a body corporate called the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities. So, although there is an entity now called the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities, it's an entity that is within the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. So, it doesn't stand on its own, neither does it have the capacity, the human resources, the financial resources, nor any of those resources, nor the power or the authority to do any of the things that the Act mandates. So that body has to be established. The Disabilities Rights Tribunal had to be established, and there had to be codes of practice developed so that the society is guided as how to avoid discrimination, because the Disabilities Act is actually a legislation that is promoting non-discrimination against persons with disabilities. So it is one of those legislation that is driving social behavior change. And so it is something that has to be carefully planned. And having not or never done this before, there have been varying trajectories that we have taken since 2013, actually, seeking to bring the act into effect. So the council started with determining, well, having island-wide consultations to look at some of the things that needed to be in these codes that are to be drafted, are developed, looking at what the regulations should look like. And so that took some time. When that was happening, governments changed. And so the board that was overseeing the work of the council, they had to go, and a new board had to come in, and
Well,
a
well,
lot
maybe
of changes
maybe
took place.
we can say welcome to Jamaica. Um, but would you say now that the fact that we're heading into 2022, would you confidently say that everything is in place and we are now
Most
ready?
things are in
Most things.
place.
Okay,
So the
fine.
regulations were approved in the parliament in October
Right.
um, of 2021. And so the regulations gives now the power and the authority for the establishment of the body corporate. It gives the body corporate the power and the mandate that it now needs to effect the provisions of the act.
What
And
are some
so
of the
that
big visions? Something that you say, boy, you every day you think, when you think about this being in the act and a part of the provisions, you give God thanks. What would you say are two, three of those provisions?
the fact that one, the council will be a body corporate.
Okay.
And a body corporate, meaning that it will be an independent body. It will no longer be in the what should I say, under or in the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. It will have its own finances. It will hire its own human resources. It will be governed by a board of management who will report to the minister. It will be a larger entity with so many more human resources. It will have a complaints mechanism that will come. Persons who feel discriminated against can come to the council to complain. There will be an investigation, and then it can be taken to the Disabilities Rights Tribunal, which is another established body that will adjudicate or hear the matters of discrimination and determine and settle the matter. That has never happened before in Jamaica nor in the Caribbean. So we are out front there, and the Caribbean is watching to see how we're implementing and bringing this act into effect. And so um, that the body corporate, so as a body corporate, it can sue and be sued. And the crown, I always say to my colleagues, the act binds the crown. And that means government will not get away either if it discriminates against persons with disabilities. The Council for Persons with Disabilities can take the government to the tribunal if it
That,
discriminates against persons with
that,
disabilities. So that's a big
that
takeaway.
that's big, and so I think we're all looking forward to this act being enforced and the provisions of it, so that the quality of life for those who have disabilities will certainly improve. Christine, how can the church help in terms of serving those with disabilities in a more effective and humane way?
And I am so happy when I got the call for this interview. I have been thinking, although I'm on vacation, my thoughts still flow in terms of work. And I have been thinking, and I'm saying, how can I get my church, which is the New Testament church that you head, to be in line to ensure that it doesn't discriminate against persons with disabilities, and we facilitate the growth and development of persons with disabilities. And so this is such an opportune
Praise God.
time
Yes.
and part of the destiny and purpose. And I'm happy I'm talking with you,
Thank you.
Bishop Notice, because you are at the place where decisions can be made and things can happen. And so let me say that persons with disabilities should not be seen as only charity cases. We have long moved past where persons with disabilities are just quote unquote taken care of. And I will jump back to my childhood just for a moment to say, if I had grown up with my mother, she would have taken care of me. And that would have handicapped me. That's not a word we call people, but it would have allowed me never to learn to become who I am today. So I needed to go live with my grand aunt because she is the person that instilled such a confidence in me that you can and you will, that I believed so much that I today can confidently talk to other parents and say, what you say to your child is critical to where they go, what they do, who they become. Many parents take their children with disabilities and shelter them to the point that they learn not to do things for themselves
Is a kind of sense of shame. The family feels ashamed.
as part of it. And so as part of the guilt, you cover, and you cover them from people looking at you and wondering what went wrong with you as the parent. And you also try to cover maybe what you feel as a parent, whatever that is, that feeling of maybe um lack of worth, lack of something, whatever it is that parents feel, why they were the ones who had to give birth to such a child, because I was the first for my mother, so you can imagine. And that taking care of mentality, we want to inject the importance of parents first speaking life over your children, regardless of what they look like, regardless of their disability, regardless of the severity of the disability. And also to help them to learn to do things. Let them learn to hold the spoon. Let them learn to hold the cup. Let them learn, no matter if they have one hand or no hands at all. People with disabilities learn with what they have. So if they have no hands, they use their feet. If they don't have feet, they use their hands. If they have nothing, they use their mouth or their eyes or their nose or their whatever it is. You would have maybe seen videos of an Nick
Yeah,
from Australia.
yeah.
He has no hands and his feet are so tiny.
Mm.
But look at what he has achieved. He has a mouth and he uses his mouth. And so I say to parents, deposit in your children that confidence that they need to become, and let them know, even if they can only lift something with their mouth and move it from one place to the other, let them do that and do it with such pride and dignity, so that they know they are contributing to something that's important. I went to Japan on numerous occasions, and I have had the privilege of going overseas and seeing how persons with disabilities live and are treated. And in 2009, and that's another story by itself, I will have to share with you one day, the Lord allowed me that that opportunity in 2009 to see disabilities from a totally different angle. I saw where persons with severe disabilities, that in Jamaica we would be taking care of them, they are working, they're married, they have children, they live in society and are part of society, they go to school. And so 2009 bolstered my advocacy and made me the person that I am. So even though I started working at the council in 1999, it wasn't until 2009 that my eyes were popped open and I had a full understanding of disability and what it means, and the fact that the convention on the convention on the rights of persons with disabilities that Jamaica ratified in 2007, that definition in that convention says that your disability is not because of your impairment, but it is the barriers in society that causes the disability. Now, that's a radical
It is.
definition
It
that
is
we have
radical.
not yet, not even us in Jamaica have yet, although we have ratified, we haven't yet adopted that, into our act. But we review in 3 years, so we'll see what happens. But
Dr.
having
Hendricks, you have said a big thing, and we're going to pull the conversation together. But the movement from just caring for to empowering, enabling, just allowing persons to be, and the taboo word that you mentioned earlier is handicap, that persons with disability are not, or disabilities are not handicapped. And I think that's just a big and major takeaway. I'm going to give you an opportunity to say some wrap-up thoughts and to speak directly to Jamaicans who still have a kind of negative attitude towards those with disabilities. In a few words, what would you say to such people?
look at me,
Mm.
look at me and what the Lord has done. If it hadn't been for the empowerment of my grand aunt way back when, if it hadn't been the opportunities to see and to know that persons with disabilities can, then maybe I too would be one of those that even as a church you would be helping out, or society would be giving a handout. And so I say, empower our people with disabilities, allow them to go to school. And that's one of the rights that the Disabilities Act promotes: the right to education and training, the right to employment. And persons with disabilities have those rights just like any other human being. As the church, persons with disabilities should be made to feel that they are contributing to the growth and development in the church, that they too should be growing and developing in the church, and they shouldn't just be seen as a charity case, the church and everybody else giving them a handout. What can they do to ensure that they become that independent individual? And let me tell you, I'm not fooling myself to believe that everybody has this mentality that I have. I have had it because of the years of exposure,
Yes, right.
because persons with disabilities themselves also has to be infused with this mindset, because we as a people have allowed them to feel disempowered, and so they believe that they have no power, but they do. And so we have to help them even to see this in themselves, their own capabilities and their own abilities. We have to help them to see that and help them to develop those. And as we lead them into education and exposure and allowing them to have a voice, allowing them to have a seat at the table, so they are part of the decision making, so they learn to make decisions for themselves, and as part of the decision making of anything, the church, the society, the organization, allowing them to train and develop like everybody else in other organizations. Give them those opportunities for growth and development, then they too can become the individuals that can be valuable members of society. And for
Hallelujah.
those that have aspired and have trained and have reached up to, tertiary level, and they have their certification and qualification, yet we refuse to give them a job. We refuse to give them a place at the table. They have that right as well. Allow them the interview like everybody else. Let it not be the disability that is the focus, but their qualification. And if it is that you want to know how they will function in the environment, then ask them, because they have very creative means of being accommodated in an environment that is not as expensive as you think. So our churches, we need to have the necessary accommodations, the ramps. But that's not the only thing. The attitude is the first move. The attitude is the first move, the first barrier we need to move. And once we move the attitude on that barrier, then the steps can be knocked down, the doorways can be widened, the sign language interpretation can be there, because we now begin to think, what can I do? What can I do as a church? What can I do as an organization to enable anybody with any disability to be part of this body and contribute to it in a meaningful way?
Woman of God, Jamaican, strong woman, educated, but also having a heart of compassion and a deep understanding of those who have disabilities. Thank you so much, Dr. Hendricks, for sharing these moments with us. I am the better for it. And certainly, big thing you said at the end, that attitudes need to change first. And those attitudes will lead to enabling actions. And I will certainly do my part in helping in that process. Thank you, Christine, and continue to be the bubbly person that you are, with a testimony that cannot be contained. May God continue to bless you as you continue to serve your church and your country for the glory of God. And may the lives of those with disabilities in this country be better because of your service. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Sure. Thank you everyone for joining us this month at Conversations at the Well. I trust that you have been touched, inspired, but also challenged by the thoughts shared by this wonderful Jamaican, Dr. Christine Hendricks. God bless you everyone. Tune in again next month for another in our series, Conversations at the Well.